Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Vincent and this is another video out of my Patreon archive, which was originally recorded in 2022. And in this video I want to redo my very first tutorial where we will use these soft ribbons to make squishy things. So let's directly get started. These are the two videos I was talking about. The left one is the original one and the right one is the new one. And I thought it would be funny to see a side-by-side comparison between the two soft body and cloth engines here. Some parts are super cool in the new stuff, some parts didn't work very well. But let's have a look into this and redo the tutorial. So first of all, this is the old scene. You can still grab it from my Patreon, and let's press play and have a look onto the scene. Overall, you can see nothing is cached here, and the frame rate is already super slow, and you can see how incredible low poly my objects are. Otherwise, the soft body engine would have been really slow here. What I really liked is the snappiness of the ribbon, the animated rest length. It's 35, so this is really quick and snappy. I couldn't make it as snappy in the new engine. It got more folds and wrinkles. But I would say let's start from the beginning. So I would say, first of all, let's copy all the objects into a new stage. And I'm doing this because probably my system has been a bit updated and my whole structure got some updates and some presets are nicer. So I think it's better to duplicate the files into here. Then overall, I got rid of this guy and I only wanted to concentrate on to these ones. So let's have a quick change from isoparms to wireframe, so that we really see what we are doing there. And the good things about the new cloth engine is that we can really crank up the resolution of the objects. And I would say let's do that. So let's turn off the cloner, get rid of the stuff which we don't need anymore. And let's have a look onto each object. So let's start with this guy here on the left. And there's a bevel in there. And again, I said this probably many times before, somehow the bevel deformer often makes problems, and I had the same issues here. As soon as I used a bevel deformer for the new simulation, I also had weird things happening. But we can bake this down. So let's say we want only few, like one edge here, and then we put this into a subdivision surface to get a smoother looking result like this. And perhaps, I don't know how high poly our simulation is gonna be, but I think like something like 1 is really good. Then let's press C to convert it. And I'm actually not sure if the UVs are transferred. Yeah, I think it looks pretty good. Well, the top and the bottom is a bit distorted, but yeah, I think this could work anyway for our simulation here, because some of the guys we need to remesh. But let's continue. Let's have a look onto our mattress here. And we can, I would say, triple the amount of polygons, or I don't know, something 35 to 45 to 8. So this is really super high poly and wouldn't be possible with the old engine. And I'm still learning all the details about the new engine, so I don't have that intuition of how many polygons we can use, but I think this is pretty good. Then let's have a look onto this guy. So we could just actually duplicate always the polygons, US, so twice the duplication. I think this would work very well, and perhaps it's interesting to have these sharp edges to see how the simulation will go with these types of things. And you can see the UVs are not good here, so we need to UV remesh this. And usually I would go to Horizon, but I think because this is so easy, we can actually just go with the automatic UV stuff in Cinema. And let's go to the bottom left to automatic UV and apply. And then we already got a pretty nice cut here. And let's press pack again to see if we get an optimized packing. And I think there's already that. So let's have a bigger view onto my screen here. And I think the transformation of the letters from the UV map are looking pretty good. So we can definitely work with this. So going back to my startup menu, then continue with the guys. So checking out these ones with the 2 rings in the inside, and Perhaps this one should behave a little bit different, so we will try without a bevel, so it will be a bit more rounded. And actually, let's make this really high poly, and let's say we are okay with 2. So I'm pressing C to convert it. Or actually, I'm not pressing C. We'll leave it in a subdivision surface so we can adjust everything later on. Then we have this guy, and well, I told you the technique about doubling the polygons, but we could also just try something very different or new. We just put this into a remesher, and then you can crank up the density of the mesh. So let's try out something like 1500. And actually the remesher is kind of doing the same as doubling the subdivisions, but in this case it's pretty nice because the polygons have the same size, and that's always good for soft body simulations. So I'm pretty happy with that, and I'm again pressing C to convert it. We don't have to, but I still have the old habit to make everything converted so we avoid weird issues. And let's check the UVs. This guy definitely needs a UV update. So let's keep it simple because this object is so simple. We go to automatic UV packing, and again we have super nice islands. Let's pack it, and we are already done with this. So cubic one, super quick and nice. Then let's have a look into this guy, and let's select all the polygons and just double it. And now you can see in this case, probably it's better to use the remesher because the polygon area sizes are not too good. So let's get ourselves a remesher, put the soft cube into the remesher, and this looks about perfect, I would say, nicely. Let's proceed to convert this guy and to access the UVs, because I'm pretty sure now the UVs are distorted. We have the same issues here. So again, quickly switching to our working space here, automatic UV applied, packing applied. Nice, switching back to startup. And by the way, give it a save from time to time, which is always good. So quick save here, and let's have a look onto some of the other objects. We have two smoother, one very smooth, one middle smooth, and a lot of sharp objects. So I'd say we will make another smooth object here. So let's select the bevel deformer and put it into the cube. Obviously, again, the wrong order. And I only want to have very little subdivisions, or let's say 0, and the offset should be a bit more. And actually, you've seen that when I'm opening my bevel deformer, it's probably different than yours, because I try to go to the habit that every time I'm changing something, I'm creating a new default custom theme. So that in the end, I really hope that I'm saving a few minutes all over the day if I avoid clicking too many things. So let's make the offset a bit bigger in here, let's say 0.5. And now without putting it in a subdivision surface, let's try to directly put it into the remesher. Crank up the mesh density to 800 or 1255 or more, 2000. Yep, this looks nice to me. And we have this interesting edge here all over the places, which is hopefully kind of nice. In this case, I'm pressing again C to remesh this, and we are repeating the process, so I'll try to be quicker. Switching down to UV, edit, automatic UV, apply, packing, apply. In this case, we have a lot of cuts. It's not too good, I would say, especially if we're using cloth on this object. It looks very ugly if we have a lot of cuts, and if sometimes the texture runs in another direction, it's a bit weird. And I didn't update the UVs for this guy, for example, and you can see this looks definitely weird. Here's a UV cut, and here's one cut, and the line from the points, they go from top left to the bottom, and these ones are parallel. So overall, it's a bit medium cool, but in the end, I was too lazy to do it. But looking at this, probably is not the best solution. And let's try to do this in Ryzen as well. And you can also do this obviously in C4D, but let's see what we get out of here with the automatic sampling. And I'm using this pelt, how's it called? Pelt thing, yeah. With this one we get as least cuts as possible. So you won't have any cuts in, for example, a cloth surface material. And I think the overall stretching here is pretty good. So the automatic mode worked very well, and I'm just pressing a few times O to try to optimize this a bit better. And yeah, I'm good with this, so I'm pressing save, and now my UVs get automatically transformed. And yeah, I think this works definitely better, especially regarding the cloth thing. So putting back everything into the cloner, and let's put on the cloner. What is very important overall with our engine, same as previously, but in this case not as important, because with the old engine, if stuff would overlap, it definitely would explode. With the new engine, it's a bit better, but let's try to avoid it and not do this. And I think the quickest way to avoid this is go into the cloner and into simulation, and we use the old simulation, the bullet one. And in the bullet tag, we go to follow position and follow rotation and put that pretty strong on. And let's check out a few frames. And now we have all the objects in line without any intersection. And this looks good, but perhaps we could even try to integrate a few more objects. Therefore, I prepared something. So I have this cube, and I thought it's kind of interesting to cut out a few holes to add this to the complexity of the scene. And let's put this into the cloner. And again, perhaps even because everything is so quick, we can try to even make it more. So then we need to drop down the frames here because we need to cache the bullet tag. Because if we don't cache it, we can't delete it. So now we go a few frames forward, and now we can press C to convert it, or I think the safest way is to press C. Then we get rid of this tag, and now we have all our objects here. And let's select the top one, and now we're applying the new simulation cloth thing. And again, I'm going back to 200 frames, and let's go back to frame 0. And let's first of all try to look how the engine runs. So, but also before that, let's try to make a bit of a variation for the objects which are doubling in here. And now this object can get a few lesser subdivisions. Let's try something like this. Nice. So quick save. And now we select the tag and copy tag to children. And one thing we have to keep in mind that he's copying the tag to the top layer and to the bottom layer. I had some issues there and I forgot this. So only for the subdivision surface here it's important. Now we are running the simulation on the high-res mesh. We could also run it on the low-res mesh, but I think for now it works pretty well. Then to just see something, I'm adding here a turbulence. Let's drop the intensity and the scale. And yeah, many people, you already know this trick to have two different scales. Then we have a bit of a more interesting animation here. And I'm pressing play. And everything is dropping down because we have to go into our simulation text, into the scene, and get rid of the gravity. Then also the scene scale, I think my objects are pretty small, but I also think your scene scale is 100. I think I changed this as a default one. So you need to drop this down as well. And I think we can even go with a lower value of 5. So let's press play and let's see if something is happening. And now you can see the frame rate here. We are still at 3.6 frames. That's pretty fast. I mean, it's super fast actually, because we have such a high resolution mesh here. And I would say this already looks pretty interesting. So perhaps this guy, and yeah, perhaps I should have kept an eye on how the resolution overall is. I think this is a bit too high res mesh for our whole scene here. And this guy is too low, but we can, for example, scale this one down so it's a bit more relative to the scene, and this guy will get a few more. And because this looks a bit boring, let's get rid of one of these and let's rearrange this a bit. And as I said, when you scale this down, it's more relative to the other ones, and we can also scale this one a bit down. So now we have a scene with a little bit more even polygons, and let's press play and see how the frame rate, if it changed something. Yeah, a little bit. Would be interesting to see, for example, if we get rid of one of these towers, which are quite high polygons, if the speed is a bit better now. Let's see, and yeah, it's 1 frame more. So 5 frames per second is pretty good. So everything is flying away, and we don't want this obviously. So first of all, let's try to even make the turbulence more interesting by adding a random field, and the same for the other one. So then we have a more interesting look for the field, and we can go into remap, into curve, and let's select the curve. And now we make a bigger contrast on the noise, and now we want to change the noise seeds so they're not the same. And let's drop down the intensity of both of them. Let's put it down to 2. And let's see what the animation does. Because overall our main animation is the ribbons moving everything together. So yeah, I think this is good. We have a little bit of motion, which is nice. And let's add the ribbons. So they're already in the scene and they're huge. So they don't need to be this huge because the scaling down effect with the new engine isn't that strong anymore. In the old one, the ribbon was really scaling down a lot, but now there is not too much happening anymore. So let's see that we don't have any intersections. That's always good. Then let's select the ribbons and again try to get a uniform polygon alignment, and we can obviously go more. So let's even try like 200 and 9 segments in the height, 200 in rotation. These tags, I tried both soft body and cloth, but overall cloth worked a little bit better. So we'll go with this one. Also, by the way, all these ones are cloth tags. I think I actually selected soft body, or I actually didn't, don't know. But we need soft body for the objects inside to be able to manipulate them even more and better. And let's press save and let's select our ribbons, and we want to animate the target length. And before we do that, actually, I need to do something. There is the thickness, and that's a bit like the old collision margin, but I read that the thickness, like for example, if there's a very high density mesh, the internal calculation can even increase the thickness or decrease. So this value isn't 100% fixed. But I would say because we are in a small scene, let's try to reduce the collision margin so that the objects are not like hovering. But we will have to play around with the value and with the collision because there is a lot of polygon poking, or there has been a lot of polygon poking in my scene, and we are still at 5 frames per second. That's pretty good. So now let's select our cloth surface and we need to animate the target lengths. And I only need a few frames to go quite, I don't know, let's say 50%. And for the very rest, we only want to have a little bit of a decrease. Then what also worked very well for me, if I increase the mass for these objects so that they're really very powerful and they're moving the objects away. And let's see what is happening. Yeah, this is too quick. So we need to move our first keyframe a little bit more to the right. So we have now 30 frames to get a 50% shrink. And yeah, this looks pretty nice. And then you can see already that the algorithm works a little bit different, and I always got these folds, so it is not so snappy. Overall, the look is interesting. Perhaps it's even more realistic, actually. Yeah, but we will play around with some of the values. But overall, I think this already works very well, and we are still at 4 frames per second, which is like incredible because, I mean, look at how detailed the mesh is. And that is definitely not nice here. We actually have to address this issue. That's not a good polygon distribution. This is always ugly, this thing here. Is the object only available once? Yeah. So let's put this guy again into a remesher. And let's drop down even the mesh density to, let's see, 60% or 50% or 45%, even like that. And yeah, I think this is, yeah, this part, it's not that nice. 40, let's play around a bit with the mesh here, and yeah, something like that, or 95. Okay, so let's say we are happy with this. Let's press C to convert this, and now we don't have UVs, or I'm pretty sure our UVs are really fucked up. Yeah, there's some weirdness happening. And let's have a quick look on the UV edit, how the automatic UV would look onto this guy. And we have, again, pretty many cuts. Yeah, but that's all right for now. And well, this is super weird, these two UV islands. I think it's better to not pack them. This looks way better. Yeah, again, you could do the Ryzen part without less cuts, or you can make your own cuts. But that's super quick, and let's see how it works. So again, saving, and let's press play. So yeah, parts are looking good. That's what I meant with the collision margin. it's still a bit hovering. So we could try to lower all the collision to something like 0.4. Yeah, there's still too much on that. And let's go back to frame 0 and let's even, well, first, well, let's duplicate them. And let's move them down and let's just make a bit of a variation here. Let's see that we don't have any intersecting polygons. And yeah, I think this looks nice. Let's hide our guys here and let's press play. And we are still at 4.5 frames per second. And I mean, look at the mesh. It's just ridiculous. This is really like amazing. So, and from now on, the whole scene takes a lot of fine tuning. And let's see, for example, the ribbon on the bottom, it has to go a bit more up because it was falling down. And one guy, this one, I think was this one, he wasn't, like nothing did hit him. Then let's try to work on the ribbons. So we definitely want to have more friction, that when the ribbon hits some of the objects, it can't slide off. So it will always stuck to the object. And you could even play around with some stickiness. I didn't have to use it in this case, but yeah, this is a really cool feature, and I will definitely play around more with the stickiness part. So this is super interesting how this object gets caught, and yeah, it's interesting. The objects are overall pretty stiff, and let's first of all talk about the simulation. So in the scene, you can arrange your sub-steps, and the lower I go here, the quicker everything calculates, and the more bendiness and soft everything gets. So let's quickly press play on the scene, and for example, we have 1 more frame per second if we drop down the rate, and you can see the look is extremely different. So you can try to adjust the stiffness on the soft body. So I'm selecting all the soft bodies. By the way, I don't want to see the lines, so I'll go to soft body and turn this off. And you can adjust the stiffness here and the stiffness here. And let's say we want the object to be super stiff. So in bendiness, it can go only 1, and stiffness is also only 1. And now you are thinking about the objects are nearly like stiff or hard, but with 5 subdivision, with 5 subframes or substeps, you can see that everything is still like super squishy. So if the main goal of your simulation or the main area where you have to judge how it looks is stiffness, then you really have to work first on the substeps, and then you can fine tune everything in here, because the substeps change the look like extremely. Compare the look from 5 to 50, and 50, now we are a bit, I think 3 frames per second off, and now you can see everything is way more stiffer, like super stiff. That's pretty good. And the stiffness is also adjusted by the iteration. This makes everything more accurate, each of the substeps. So if I would even put it up to 2 and even add 1 smoothing iteration, then everything would be, again, way more stiff. Then the dampening drains out the energy of the system. So if there's too much jittering, perhaps you can try to increase this value a bit. But for me, like if I went over 5 or between 5 and 10, everything looked like underwater. And also my simulation, which I made as a test here, looks a little bit underwatery, a little bit. So I perhaps went a bit too much with the dampening here. But you can see now, well, it's now probably hard to see the difference, but overall everything should be a little bit more stiff. And with the collision parsers, they are really good to fine tune your collisions, but overall there is no overlapping polygon or no intersection here. That's still very good. In my tests, I had a lot of intersections, and I had to crank up these values quite a lot, and then the scene gets even slower. But I don't see any issues at all here, so that's pretty good. So I'm checking some of the collisions, and also let's have a quick look onto our surface. And yeah, there's still a little bit too much hovering. So let's select all our objects and let's check out the surface, and let's drop down the thickness to 0.4, and perhaps just to be a little bit safer, I will increase the passes for the collision just by 1. I don't know how much of computation power we are losing here. It's 1.9 frames compared to 2.1. So yeah, it's very teeny tiny. Yeah, it's even 1.9 now. So I don't know if we're losing much of calculation if we just increase the steps by 1. Let's check some of the collisions. They're all looking pretty good. Just only very little bit of hovering. But for example, these guys will get cloth tags in the end, but there's one downside from the cloth tag. It only goes up in this direction. So we are not filling the gap. We are just making everything a bit thicker. But again, there's our first collision problem. We didn't have that when we had the value of 0.5. We now integrated with the value from point. There's another one. So let's increase our steps here and perhaps even make an extra iteration. And let's see if we can get rid of this intersection there. And by the way, let's also go back to frame 0, and I don't want this to be so stiff. So the default value is 20, everything is quite squishy, but I wanted it to be a little bit more stiffer because now all the soft body settings are still on like the most stiff what you can get from these settings. So the 0 stretchiness and only like 1 bendiness. I mean, we can also go 0 bendiness. Let's select them and let's go 0. And soft body, we can also go 0, and then it's really the most stiffest what we can get. So there is again some polygon problems, and yeah, let's select, go down to 0, and let's see how soft our objects are, even though they should be incredible stiff. And later on, we definitely want some smooth stuff. And for the smooth stuff, I think it really helps with these problems, because if everything can bend more, then we don't have these poking polygons. And the overall look is pretty nice. And we don't have any further problems except for this one guy here. And I think we will get it rid of over time. So let's focus on some of the objects. And therefore, I am soloing one object, and I'm using Magic Solo here by Nitroman. And if you click that, everything turns off. And the good thing but for Magic Solo is he turns off like really everything, and then the scene is way faster. So we have 30 frames here, and now we can play around with the simulation. But perhaps to get a little bit more interesting preview for our simulation, I'm selecting this guy and 2 of my turbulence objects, and I'm soloing, and let's press play. So we have a bit of the turbulence going on. Obviously, it's really hard to judge what is happening here. So therefore, let's select 2 objects. So I'm selecting these 2, and I'm pressing solo. So perhaps we can get some interaction between these 2. Yeah, not much is happening here. Let's say we want this guy to grow, and perhaps in the middle of the whole scene, this guy can grow. And this should be a balloon. So by the way, let's press play and see what's happening if we activate a balloon. Now, not much, because the pressure of 1 is like it tries to remain its shape, its overall shape. If we drop down the value, for example, to 0.5, it drains out the air. With 0.5, this guy is already going pretty crazy, and the closer you go to 0, the more, I call it, dangerous it will get. So let's make it 0.1 and save the scene, and let's see. And a lot of air is coming out of this guy. So if we want it to be a little bit deflated, let's try out something like 0.9. Perhaps this would work without getting any weird happenings. You can see it tries to shrink down, and you can also go this in the other way, for example, to give it a little bit of overpressure and 0.5 of overpressuring. And yeah, this could be interesting. One point is with the overpressure, everything is very stiff. So perhaps the polygons can bend and can stretch. And that's why the pressure is getting a bit of a struggle what's happening here. So let's try to increase the bendiness and stretchiness and the soft body to, I don't know, the default is 100, let's go with 200, and the surface can already bend and stretch a lot. And now you can see the overpressure has a way more, I would say, better, easier game to that something is happening here. And let's try to get a reference for how these 2 would work differently. And actually, by adjusting all these values, I think we don't need the cube. So I am only selecting the objects we're working on and the 2 turbulence objects, and let's solo them. So pressing play, and this is with a lot of bendiness, but with no stickiness. And let's also, I don't know, change our values a little bit. It's too much flying away, and dropping down some of the values, so it's still pretty much flying away. By the way, let's check out if it is the big scale object who makes this object fly away, or if it's the small scale. So it looks like it's the small, it's just flying away because of the pressure. Okay, so none of the turbulence had any effect of them. Then let's select the soft body tag again, and I want to show you the opposite thing. So let's make it very stretchy, but not very bendy. And this looks definitely more like a gilet or like an... And overall, I like this look better for this guy. But let's try to not make it as intense. Let's see how it works with 10 and 200. Nah, it was a bit better before. Let's try to go 5 and 300. And we are getting closer to an interesting look. Let's try 2 and 400. Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting shape, and I like this guy. Then let's have a look on how the variation is if we change the softness. So we have, by the way, 17 frames per second here, and I had the feeling it was a bit slower with this. No, it's the same. So what's the visual difference between 0 and with 0, it's a bit more pointy and spiky, I have the feeling. And with a high value, let's really make it like super high. Now everything is very jelly-like and very soft. So this looks quite interesting, but it's definitely too much for our taste. And again, compare this to 0. By the way, this is also interesting to change it on the run. So this is like a, I don't know, a hard thing. Let's check out the default value of 100 and let's see how the simulation looks. And 100 is also pretty nice, but let's try to make it a bit more softer because I like the balloon look on this guy. So yeah, 300 is a pretty good value here. Then for the max poles per points, I'm leaving it for default for now. I have to try around and play a bit more. But yeah, this is actually a big difference here. You can see how the objects look with 2 poles. And by the way, what it does if we activate it. So if we make one object, you can see how many connections are there between the polygons. And if we make, I don't know, 3, it has a lot of connections. So let's turn this off and let's press play. And I think the pressure it's more stiff now, and the pressure has more problems to find object like area where it's not so stiff to overinflate compared to one where the whole object is a bit jiggling and the air can go in all the objects quite easily. Let's try to make it even high really. I don't know, by the way, how high when it's getting critical with these numbers. We are still pretty good, and yeah, now the object is so stiff that it can't find any pressure, any good area for the pressure. So let's drop it down to 1 or 2. So I think 2 is looking pretty good. And let's perhaps drop down the pressure a little bit. So something like 0.4. This looks nice. And let's also say we want to animate this. So the expansion time I will drop down to 5 frames. And let's make it 1.5. And let's see how that would look. So overall, in the beginning of the simulation, it's not doing much. And then poof, comes a little bit of an explosion. And on top of that, it would be super interesting to animate the target length from the soft body and even the target length from the surface. And the surface can go 150 and the soft body part 125. And this should give us a really intense puff here. And it looks lame. It looks very weird what we did there. Don't know which part made it weird. Let's only animate the surface and see what we get there. Yeah, a longer, like a increased surface looks pretty interesting. And let's have a look on the target length again. What about if it is even like way more than before? Before my first try was 125, now I made it 175. In this case, it's just weird. So let's get rid of the target length and let's only keep it on the surface, which looked pretty nice. Then I would say for this guy, we are pretty happy. Let's unsolo our simulation and let's quickly adjust some of the objects. For example, this guy should be also more bendy, and let's make it 2020, and also it should be very soft here. And our mattress, we can try out some other things which has in here, for example, plastic deformation. And for now, I will only use the default, so it gets like kind of hits and it tries to remain that shape. But for that, we also should make it a bit more bendy and a bit more soft, but overall this is pretty stiff. And to make it even more stiff, let's also try to make 2 poles here. And I don't know, let's just make one pretty balloony guy, a lot of stretchiness, and I'll make it 500 or even 1500. And let's see how a ballooniness of 2 looks onto this guy. And let's press save and press play. And let's see how everything will play out, because we changed a lot of things here. So I definitely like our balloony guy here, and I think he can be even more balloony by making the pressure even more, and the surface can bend even more. And yeah, let's see. Now here's a pressure hole. This is pretty nice. We don't want to overdo it, because then we have so many UV deformation, and then this part would look ugly as a rendered thing. So let's try not that strong of a pressure, so in the end this bubble is not as big. And let's have a look. So overall, I have the feeling that our ribbons can get a bit smaller, and this guy is making a little bit of trouble. It might be that it's jittery, but overall the scene is pretty stiff. So let's drop down the substeps to 22, so everything's a bit more smooth. And this guy's definitely too stiff. So let's make it more soft again. Also, this guy should be like super squishy, and it should have a higher friction, so perhaps it will be more to this area. And also this guy, we could try to implement the stickiness, so it will stick to everything in there. And it should be relatively bendy, so it's not a pretty high, but a little bit of a value. And let's also make it soft, and let's play. And overall, what I'm doing here takes quite a while. I mean, the engine is super quick, this is nice, but in the end, I would say the scene takes as long as the old tutorial, because we have way more options. Now I can art direct everything way more, and I can make objects way more interesting. And yeah, we just have to look on all the objects and see which areas are interesting, what we can change, what is what, I don't know, what is what. So yeah, I want more of these soft, really soft parts. And let's say this guy is a really soft guy. And let's see what we have to do with this. So first of all, let's make it more soft, and let's give it some pressure. And let's make it like 2000 here. And for now, let's have a look how this looks. And well, we can already pause, because I think it would be nice if this guy gets like a balloonish look. So I'm doubling the pressure for the balloon intensity here. And yeah, I definitely like this more. It has like a pillow feeling and it's way more organic. And the good thing is about organic shapes, they really help you to create a depth in the image, because we have nice contrast between areas, where's light and where's shadow. Compared to hard surfaces, it's way more difficult to make them look nice. So yeah, this is all looking good. These 3 are, or the top 4 ribbons are too long. And this ribbon is falling down. So this ribbon is falling down. Let's move it up, and I think we have a bit of a collision here. Yeah, and this one is too big. We can scale it down, and let's select the top 3 of them. And now I want to animate them a bit more nicely, so I'm going into my graphs. And first of all, we can actually select all the cloths to select all the keyframes and ease them. So here you can ease them, and I want them to move in quite quickly. And then we ease this curve, and perhaps you can even drop this down a little bit more, and also this guy. So they will get even smaller in the end. And the top 3 ones were too big. So let's select them, and let's lower the scale in the beginning. And let's press save, and let's see what we did there. And also perhaps I should have used a few less objects, so the tutorial part would be easier to go through the steps, but I think it's pretty interesting to create directly a piece which you already like. And the more pieces you have, I think it's more interesting to implement different materials, and you can create nice contrasts with lights, colors, and look and feels, and yeah, haptics. So this guy is falling out of a shape, but we are definitely starting something interesting here. The explosion is too strong for this one. I think it looks weird. So let's select our keyframes and make it way smoother. And let's try to move it a little bit in place, a little bit more down, so perhaps it will get stuck more into the simulation. Then again, let's make some objects in a variation. And I like the squishy thingies. And perhaps for this one, we can animate the balloon. So overpressure of 1 is like the default value. And perhaps over time, he can even increase to 3, sorry. And we need to make the surface a bit more stretchy. And yeah, let's give it a try, and let's press play, and let's see how everything looks. So this guy is too squishy and too jiggly. Something, he's not the best guy, but I think it's even interesting that he's losing the connection to the flock of all the objects. So this one looks nice, this one looks great, this one looks also interesting. This one is too stiff, definitely too stiff. It kind of looks like it's not even deforming at all, because we still have everything on 0. But it's also good to know that you can do that, because it's pretty hard to combine the old bullet engine and the new part. But it's, yeah, this is good that it's not deforming. So let's keep it pretty stiff. Perhaps a tiny little bit deformation. And also, let's make it more sticky. They're all looking good, but on this side we have too much sharp objects happening. So let's play around with this one. And now you can remember what we have to do to make it squishy. So I'm changing some of the values, and perhaps also this guy will get an animated overpressure over time. Perhaps this one starts at the very beginning and ends with a pretty high number of 4 at the very end. And to give some keyframes to the object is probably interesting, so the animation won't look as boring, because in the end there's not much happening. In the beginning there's a lot of happening with the ribbons, but from frame 15 to 200 not too much is happening. Yeah, this is definitely way more interesting in this part. All interesting. Let's have a look onto, now we have a little bit of soft body going on here because we implemented the value of 1, and I think I like that. But yeah, these twos are too stiff. Let's say, should we keep this one stiff or this one? Let's make this one soft, and perhaps it should only be very little bit of soft. And now we should actually make these two also very soft, because there is an issue. When we bake everything and then we put in a bevel deformer in there, the bevel deformer really gives you headaches. It can make weird rendering, and it's sometimes twitching, and yeah, I don't know. And to render this with this edge is way too sharp. So we could put the bevel deformer into the object right now and simulate the bevel with it, or we make this one super squishy so we won't have these sharp edges anymore. And I would say let's make this one beveled. So I'm pressing Shift C on the keyboard and I'm selecting the bevel deformer, and let's put that in. Our values are here now are wrong, so I will go with 0.3 and perhaps even 1 subdivision, 0.4, yeah, something like that. And let's convert this guy and have this connect object and delete shortcut put on my main bar here, so I can just click it, and that's quicker and easier. And now we are getting rid of the sharp edges. So let's press save, it's always good for that, and let's press play and see how the simulation runs on this guy. And now it's way more squishy, and nah, I don't like the look of it. So let's drop down all the values to 1 and see how this looks. there are some polygon problems because there's a really sharp edge here. Perhaps only for this object then we need to increase the collision margin, but I like that it's pretty stiff. It's not 100% stiff as in the beginning, but it's pretty much. Then we select this guy and we need to increase the thickness, our collision margin here. And let's hope that we are getting rid of the edge. And perhaps what we could also try, still the same. Let's make it even more. And 2 is really high already. And perhaps it can bend a little bit more, so some of the objects are less in problem and perhaps less friction. So perhaps the polygons which are making problems could slide away. And let's also have a look at the rest of this stuff, how far it's actually pretty close. Even though our collision margin, the thickness is already 2, the objects are pretty close. So let's see what happens if we're doubling this. And perhaps now the stuff is happening, what I read in the cinema instruction, that this value is not always that sometimes internally he is calculating the stuff different when the size of the polygon is smaller. And I think in this case it's doing because there is no actually difference on the collision here. It's still super tight, even though we have a thickness of 4. So that doesn't work. Then let's, I don't know, move this object just a little bit around and hope we avoid some of the polygons, and let's make it a bit more stretchy. And let's, as a last thing, worry about this guy. And if, well, first of all, he should be smaller, because if this guy will inflate now, we have a pretty low res mesh because he's already pretty low. And let's see, he gets more bendiness and stretchiness and a ballooniness and a softness of 500. And let's see how that will change. Yeah, that's good. We get rid of the sharp edge. So everything looks pretty nice. Let's try to fine tune some things. First of all, this guy I don't like yet too much. And perhaps this one can be even more bendy and stretchy. So we select the cube and let's double the bendiness and the stretchiness. And this guy perhaps is too stretchy. Let's make it 15 and 50 or 25 and 65. And let's see. And now you can see the mattress definitely has more, it's more folding now. That's nice. This guy might be also nice, but also let's move it a little bit more higher so the ribbon will hit it more in the middle. I think it looks all pretty nice. There was perhaps a little bit too much of jiggling in there, so I will increase the dampening to 3, and I think now we can cache the whole scene and see how everything looks. And the caching is quite quickly in this case, but I'll make a break here. So the simulation is done and let's press play, and we have enough frame rate, so it's real time, 60 here. And this looks pretty nice, except from this guy I don't like. He's too spiky and definitely weird. What's happening here? So these two ribbons are too close together. We need to move one more up, I would say. And this guy definitely we need to change. And perhaps we animate also pressure for this guy over time. So a little bit more is happening. So we said 3 things. Move down the ribbon, animate this guy, and this guy has to be changed. Going down to frame 0, and let's delete all the cache. So let's go into this guy, and the ballooniness, let's say it starts with, perhaps we go even 0.9, so there's a bit of a negative pressure in the beginning, and at the very end of our simulation, let's make it 2.8. Then this guy, I don't know, let's make it again more soft and more soft. And we don't animate the target length. Let's leave it how it is. But it should be more bendy and more stretchy. And let's hope that it will be a bit more integrated in the scene. And this ribbon needs to go a bit more up. And perhaps we can even try to make a bit of a variation in the ribbons so that they're not all the same. And let's save and press play. So yeah, I like what we're doing there. Now perhaps to even get a bit more of variation, let's say this ribbon snaps in way slower. So not all the ribbons are going at the same pace. And I want to do the same with this one. Let's move it a bit more to the right, and I'm changing the curve here a bit. Perhaps this ribbon can even have a bit of a something like that. And again, I'm always trying to add little details to the animation so that not everything looks so uniform. And our in point for the animation is, well, could be something around here, a little bit later. Yeah, this guy comes now too late because I don't want to start the simulation when things are still happening. And I see this in a lot of animations that people are rendering from frame 0 to the end. And we first want to let this settle a little bit so it looks nicer. But let's move the keyframes again a bit more to the left. And the ones who are going that quickly in there are the ones from here. So going back to frame 0 and let's press play. Yeah, and we can definitely go somewhere in there around frame 20 and it looks good. But this guy is again perhaps too jiggly. Let's make it a bit more stiff again and the pressure a bit less so it's not so jumping around. And there's actually some collision problems there as well. So in the end, let's give this ribbon a little bit more of a surface. So thickness of 0.5 and even one more collision path. And let's run down the simulation again to see if we still have some problems in here. Yeah, there's still problems with the intersection. Let's make it 0.6 and let's go again and increase one more collision. And again, this guy, he's still looking weird. Don't like the look of this one. So trying to make it more stiff again and just the pressure of 1, so no overpressure. And what could also be a problem now is that perhaps the simulation here is too quick. So because the faster your keyframes are, the more difficult it is for the engine to get it right. And let's try to make it less. So now it's a bit more uniform in the simulation and not that fast. And let's see how that looks. Yeah, now we don't have any intersecting problems anymore. And I am pretty happy with the result. Except for this guy's still so jiggly, wiggly, weird, spooky, spiky. Okay, last try with this one, then I will just leave it. So, more softness, less stretchiness, more bendiness, and let's see. Yeah, definitely it's getting better. And I would say everything else in the simulation looks super nice and I like what I'm doing here. And let's put that into the final cache. So simulation is done and let's have a look. And let's also already have a look onto more of a long lens camera here. And I think this looks super nice, except from this little fucker. I really don't like him. We gave everything we could. Goodbye, my friend, you need to go. But now we need to cache everything again, so clear cache and cache scene. And at this point I will say thanks for listening and watching for this part 1. It took a while and you can see that there's still a lot of iteration in the new workflow, but I really love the result now and looks way more interesting than the old soft body part. So I will calculate everything and then we'll have a look onto some of the rendering things. So thanks and see you around.